Is there any chance at all you're going to look at it again?
No.
Or yes. Testing the meaning of the word strong and stable, the Prime Minister has made a staggering U-turn on social care and has compounded the embarrassment by pretending she's done no such thing.
I've clarified what we will be putting in the Green Paper, which I set out in the manifesto.
So Jeremy Corbyn is now rewriting your manifesto?
No, not at all.
We'll ask what this tells us about Theresa May's style of leadership and what it tells us about the future of social care. Also tonight.
I have come around lately to quite a radical idea. I think compulsory voting could actually be the answer.
Terrible idea.
And does anyone think Facebook are any good at acting as a censor of public discourse?
So why then does Facebook allow this? Or this?
Hello. Certain arguments go round in circles in this country. The one about expansion of Heathrow Airport, for example, and the one about how we pay for social care. And today, in what can only be said to be a jaw-dropping move, the Conservatives have, mid-election, reverted to a social care policy they had just junked. There will be a lifetime cap on care costs after all. Now, this is an important moment. We may be close to a resolution of the care issue, as both Conservative and Labour parties want that cap. The fuss over the Tory plans of the last few days seems to have nudged the country into a new deal on care. But the other important thing about today is what it has done to the Conservative campaign built on the supposedly decisive leadership of Theresa May. The words strong and stable have come back to hit the party in the face. And perhaps bizarrely, the party has attempted to suggest, contrary to all evidence, that there has been no change in policy at all. Well, Nick Watt, our political editor, is with me. Nick, can you think of anything like this in an election campaign?
I cannot think of a precedent of a manifesto, a U-turn on a manifesto, or in the official parlance, a clarification during a campaign. Now, I can only remember general elections going back to 1979. So let's turn to the great Oxford psephologist, Sir David Butler, and he tweeted today, in the 20 general elections he's covered, he cannot think of a U-turn on this scale, or indeed a U-turn at all.
So look, what went wrong here?
Well, look, ministers are saying that the Prime Minister was brave and right to say you've got to face up to the social care crisis and that people with means should have to pay. But they said they experienced blowback on the doorstep. One Tory candidate told Newsnight that this looked like a plate of sick, and there were two problems that were identified. Firstly, it wasn't fair. If you have cancer, the state will pay for your care. If you have dementia and you need to be cared for at home, you will be liable. And the second thing they said was it offends the idea, the Conservative idea, that you should be able to leave a legacy to your children. And that obviously wasn't there, because it says on the original plans that if you have to pay, then you would have only a guarantee of £100,000 left in your estate. And finally, they identified Nick Timothy, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, as the culprit. Some ministers talk about a small coterie around the Prime Minister. And one minister said to me, the problem with Nick Timothy, he's a socialist.
I mean, it's been a strange day for the party and for her. At the end of it, how is it playing tonight? Where are they?
Well, I spoke to one minister who said, look, if we win this election and we win it big, this will be forgotten as a mid-campaign wobble. But there has been quite a lot of criticism of the Prime Minister's refusal throughout the day to acknowledge that she has changed tack. And there are echoes of Gordon Brown cancelling the election that never was in 2007, and he said that that had nothing to do with the opinion polls. Ha ha ha, because we journalists were told precisely the opposite. So it really has been quite a big day. So we've looked at Theresa May's wobbly Monday. We were promised strong, stable and, yes, consistent leadership. But what's this? A U-turn on one of the central planks of the Conservative General Election Manifesto. At a tetchy press conference this morning, Theresa May announced there would be an absolute limit on care costs. The Prime Minister dismissed talk of a U-turn because she's upholding a guarantee that elderly people who rely on social care will have £100,000 left in their estate.
We have not changed the principles of the policy that we set out in our manifesto. Those policies remain exactly the same.
Ministers are in no doubt that this is a U-turn, and a big one at that. They say they were experiencing blowback on the doorstep from natural Tory supporters who said the policy was unfair and offended the Tory principle that you should be able to pass on a legacy to your children. And ministers also have in their sights the Prime Minister's Joint Chief of Staff, Nick Timothy, who drew up the manifesto in great secrecy. So, Stuart, one veteran of numerous Labour manifestos believes Theresa May has damaged her own brand.
What she's managed to do today, extraordinarily, is turn her own leadership advantage against Jeremy Corbyn into a corrupted brand. I mean, she wants to be strong and stable, the Prime Minister that is steely and determined and has resolve. But the sort of toing and froing and U-turning and irascibility in press conferences, all that corrupts exactly the kind of brand of her leadership that she wants to make her biggest asset.
And of course, this is not the first time our strong and stable Prime Minister has embarked on a U-turn. Others include calling an early general election after definitively ruling one out, ditching plans in the budget to increase national insurance contributions for the self-employed, watering down proposals for workers to be given places on company boards, abandoning plans to oblige companies to declare the proportion of overseas workers. Ministers say the U-turn was prompted in part by an apparent dip in Tory support in weekend opinion polls. But one polling expert thinks the picture is more complex.
I think it's really, really easy to see this as kind of a seismic shift in the results and how people are feeling. But actually, if you get outside the Westminster bubble, people are talking about lots of different issues. Some of them were talking about the dementia tax, as they called it, but actually lots were talking about fox hunting too. And some were just talking about Labour's policies and feeling like those were quite attractive, and they were hearing a bit more from Labour on some of the specifics of what they were going to do than the Conservatives.
But there is no doubt that the U-turn of 2017 will have a lasting impact on how Theresa May is perceived. A former Conservative speechwriter who coined the phrase dementia tax believes the U-turn shows the Prime Minister has rather un-Tory views.
Doesn't feel very Tory. It perhaps hasn't been thought through as much as it might have been. I think there's probably a danger in government when the press are generally behind you, that you're not perhaps as cautious as you might be. So I think perhaps Number 10 overlooked the kind of reaction they might get from voters.
Lord Wood believes the U-turn has ended up undermining the UK in Brussels.
Brexit negotiators in the European Union will be smiling quietly to themselves because she's made such a big play of her steely determination. This has been her big message to the British public and to Europe. I'm not to be messed with, I'm a bloody difficult woman. But she's U-turned on a flagship policy in her manifesto, and I'm afraid that will give encouragement to people that she's going to be negotiating with for the next year and a half.
Theresa May's circle believe today is a classic mid-campaign wobble. Whether it casts a long shadow will depend on whether the Prime Minister secures a decisive election result.
Nick, what there? Well, we'll talk about leadership and election tactics shortly, but when it comes to social care, is this a case where, to adapt a line from Churchill, we're fumbling towards the right policy after trying everything else? Chris Cook, our policy editor, reports.
The English care system is a running problem for the government. Although, to be blunt, it's a problem because we choose it to be a problem.
The amounts of money that you need to fix it are not huge. I mean, we're not talking about the 100 billion plus we spend on the health service. An extra 2 or 3 or 4 billion in social care would go an awfully long way. It goes almost nowhere when you throw it at the NHS.
The care system has 3 moving parts to think of. We're calling them the savings floor, the care cap and the means test. Let's start with the means test. The question here is, what assets count when the state is working out whether you can get paid for care or not? At the moment, if you live in a care home, basically all your assets count to the means test. But if you get care in your own home, in so-called domiciliary care, your house doesn't count to the total. The Tory manifesto last week, though, proposed putting the house in the means test for everyone. A big takeaway by the government.
Today you announced a cap.
Indeed, the point of these proposals is Mrs May wants more money.
In 10 years' time, there will be 2 million more people over the age of 75. Now, our social care system will collapse unless we do something about it.
The second moving part is what we're calling the floor. Once it's checked your assets, under the current system, the state won't start helping you out until you've spent your assets down to just over £23,000. The idea is you should have a minimum amount of cash that you can keep. Last week, though, the Tories proposed to raise that to £100,000. This element was a modest giveaway, although it's unclear how modest.
It's very hard to know whether the proposals that the Conservatives are putting together will cost or save money, particularly the proposals last week, which were to raise money from the winter fuel allowance, to raise money from putting the home into the domiciliary care means test, and then to spend some on the means test. It wasn't clear, without knowing the details of the levels at which all of those things would occur, what the overall net effect would be.
The third element is what we're calling the cap. This is the part that was added today. The idea is to say you might have a load more money than the floor, but even if you get very sick, you should never need to pay more than a fixed amount for your care. Say this cap were £150,000. Even the very rich would never need pay more than that before the state would start to help. The idea is to pool risk, like issuing insurance.
When we're faced by something where there's a risk of something really nasty but it's not very likely, we don't all of us want to save enough just in case that nasty risk occurs. We want to save the average amount, spread that across the whole population and join together, recognising that then if we're one of the unlucky ones, we will be fully covered.
Today we saw a big U-turn, introducing a cap, having ruled it out last week. A reminder that it's not just the cost that's the problem with social care, it's the unpredictability and the fact that it hits the sickest the hardest.
Chris Cook there. Well, at the beginning of the campaign, when the Tories had huge poll leads, it was said there would be a Tory wobble at some point, and we're certainly witnessing the tremors at the moment, the polls moving in Labour's direction. Let's talk about what all this says. I'm joined by Rachel Sylvester of The Times and Stephen Glover of the Daily Mail, which surprised some of its readers by seemingly supporting the original care policy. And Stephen, are you happy that they put a cap in? I mean,
well, I think there's no doubt that the original policy was a cock-up and an own goal. And having realised that, having had a panic about the polls over the weekend, Theresa May's done what she had to do, which was to, put a cap in.
Well, what does this say about her steely determination, though? I thought she was like decisive and listened and then made decisions.
I think you could. I mean, I think it says it's quite a lot of things about her. It says that she, I mean, they obviously rushed at this. I think she's too reliant on one or two advisors, particularly Nick Timothy. I mean, he's a very, very clever chap. I mean, the irony of all this, of course, is that the policy which was announced on Thursday is kind of leaning to the left, and yet it was an own goal, and she allowed Corbyn to sound plausible in his criticism of it. That's the irony. I think they didn't think it through, and she's done the sensible thing, which is to say there should be a cap.
So it's to spot you need to make a retreat and begging. Can I just ask, what does it say about the Daily Mail? Because your headline was very positive. It was, at last you won't have to give up your home.
It's not blaming writing the headlines, Evan, but I think the feeling was that it was brave of her to try to tackle the issue, and that young people can't be expected to subsidise old people forever. I think that was the feeling behind it.
Rachel, what do you think it tells us on the policy-making side about Theresa May's mastery of issues, perhaps outside the Home Office brief? Obviously, she was very strong on that, where she served for 5 years.
Yes, what worries me most about this isn't actually the U-turn, which I think is sensible. It was the fact that she ended up with this initial policy in the first place, because it didn't solve any of the problems in the social care system. And as your people explained on the films, the issue is the lottery between those who have certain conditions and those who have other conditions. And the policy that they put forward didn't deal with that at all, so it kind of missed the point. So she went through this whole controversy and all the row for absolutely no purpose. So we've ended up in a better place, but I think it reflects very badly on her ability to make policy.
And the campaign, though, is around, coalition of chaos under Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think it damages the brand.
Of course it does. She prides herself on her competence, you know, the safe pair of hands. That's why she won the Tory leadership. That's why she's the strong and stable candidate up against Jeremy Corbyn, of course. But this completely undermines that. It's a huge own goal.
Stephen, I can only imagine what you guys would be writing if Labour had U-turned on a policy within 4 days of publishing the manifesto. I mean,
well, God knows what one will be writing. I mean, I think there's no question that she's made a mistake. I mean, you know, she's made a mistake, but having made a mistake, she's trying to dig herself out of it. And I suspect that in a week's time we'll have forgotten all about it. You know, we're very excited because this is the first upset in a very boring campaign.
Okay, look, the second aspect to this, and in some ways the more surprising to me, is her inability to stand up today and say, well, it didn't play well, we listened, and just to sort of pretend that this is always intended, and if you read the manifesto carefully, well, it never said there wouldn't be a cap. I mean, what's going on?
The obsession with looking strong ends up making her look weak, and I thought it looked completely bizarre to pretend that what was absolutely obviously a U-turn wasn't. And there's also this sense that she's in denial about the reality. I think she's relying, as Stephen said, too much on her coterie, very small coterie. She's not listening to what other people say.
It is a U-turn, by the way, isn't it? I mean, everybody agrees. It is a U-turn.
Well, it's either a shift or a U-turn. I mean, it's not a complete U-turn because U-turn suggests she's gone back in the other direction. It's just...
well, they said no cap.
She's gone from
no cap, and they've gone
floor
back
to a cap, which is pretty the opposite.
It's an own goal, and it's a needless own goal.
Right. Now, when it comes to Brexit negotiations, you're a European leader. This woman lasts 4 days under pressure and then caves. I mean, what are they going to... mincemeat are they going to make of her?
Well, I think we surely want a leader who's going to be flexible. I mean, we've agreed that she made a mistake. She's realised the mistake, and she seems to have the policy on the right tracks. We surely want a leader who can... recognise the mistake she's made and face up to it. But I agree, we can't, you know, she can't do this too often. I mean, it is actually a slight echo of the national insurance in the budget, where the Nick Timothys of this world blamed it all on poor old Hammond. But of course, Number 10 knew about it, and they should be
Rachel, do you think the comparison to Gordon Brown, briefly, is a valid one at this particular point?
I think, like him, she's got a slightly tin ear, so she kind of misses the kind of emotional point of politics. And I think that's potentially very bad in the European negotiations, which are going to depend on empathy and relationships, as well as being a difficult woman.
Thank you both indeed. Interesting day. And before we move on, let me tell you that social care is one of the subjects that is bound to come up next week when Newsnight will be debating the generation gap in British politics. It's a special programme. It's coming from Newcastle, and we will have an audience. Now, it's an audience of over 60s and under 30s. Nowhere in between. If you're in one of those two categories, you may be interested in being there. If you are, just email us at newsnight@bbc.co.uk. Well, OK, our next item is another one that has snagged various political parties in the past, university tuition fees in England. At the last election, Labour promised to cut them to £6,000. This time the party's going much further, planning to abolish them altogether. It is, by some margin, the most expensive promise Labour has made. It costs more than 4 times more than the money they found for social care, for example. And to make it feel like a real pledge, they've said students starting this September will have any fees they pay given back to them, so that'll all be written off. So is this the best way to spend a £10 billion a year of public funds? I'm joined from Soft by the Shadow Schools Minister, Mike Kane. And Mike, thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
Can I just ask, confirmation really, students who have already passed through university and have maybe got debts of 50,000, they will get no help, even though in a way they're paying twice, aren't they? They'll be paying their own university fees and they'll be paying the higher taxes to pay for everyone else's university fees.
Well, the average debt for students leaving university, Evan, is around about £45,000, and that's come about because under the last government, tuition fees were tripled, nursing bursaries were abolished, and also the maintenance grant for our poorest students, many of us, like myself, who relied on that to go to university, was also scrapped in direct violation to the last Tory manifesto. So that's why we've got the huge level of toxic debt.
Can I just be clear
in our
that the
graduate
people,
population?
Your plan is for people to pay higher taxes and you say those taxes will fall on the very wealthy, it's to pay higher taxes to pay for university tuition. Those people who've got their 50,000 of debt will both have paid the tuition and pay the higher taxes. Is that correct? And you'll do nothing for them?
Well, unlike the Conservatives, we've obviously got a fully costed manifesto. So the key thing here will be that...
So no help for them, though? Well, it's not costed in your manifesto, certainly.
We have the most indebted students, graduates, upon the planet currently, living in a toxic debt cycle. For instance, in my constituency, I have 3,000 people with 3,000 families with 5,000 children in those families living in toxic debt. We are now creating a middle-class toxic
I think
debt
everyone understands
cycle of students, and the nation just can't afford that going forward. £80 billion worth of student debt now among that generation, and the government's already saying it won't be able to collect £1 in £4 of that debt. So the policy clearly isn't working.
Okay, Mr. Kane, you said the party policy is costed. Now, what growth in student numbers have you factored in when you remove the fees? Because obviously the fees must deter some students. That's one of the reasons why you would want to remove them. What growth in student numbers are you factoring in your costings?
Well, you were asking about the implementation. This obviously starts in autumn 19, because there's no way we'll be able to get this in for the students starting next autumn, although we will retrospectively pay off those student loans for those students starting in the forthcoming autumn term. This is costed around 400,000 students. 366,000 of them are full-time, around 54,000.
Have you factored in growth of students? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't want to go through the basic costings. Have you factored in growing student numbers as a result of this policy, or are you expecting that the numbers will not grow?
Well, currently, because of the toxic debt, universities can't fill their places, Evan, and that is the problem. So this is costed at around 400,000 students.
Now, is it not the case?
And part-time.
Sorry to interrupt.
Education.
We haven't got much time, and I really want to push you on this. Is it not the case that student numbers will grow, or is it your plan to limit the numbers of students who will go to university and put a cap and say it's 400,000 or whatever the number is?
Well, as a constituency MP, Brexit taught me three things. People are worried about their skills, they're worried about emigration, and they're worried about the changing pace of technology in the workplace. People feeling left behind. This is a policy designed for the 21st century that people don't feel left behind. I was testing this on the doorstep today.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm going to interrupt. I just asked about, will you ration the number of places at university?
No cap.
No cap on the number, any number.
No cap on the number.
Will you ration
We will relieve any pressure that comes about because we've already made commitments in higher and further education.
So
but
anybody can go to... But that then means, will you tell universities that will you stop their departments expanding? Can universities just expand their departments as they like and be paid for every student who goes there? Because that's very different to as it was when we had no fees. When we had no fees, the numbers were controlled and universities were told how many students they could take in different subject areas. Is your proposal that any universities can just expand as much as they want and anybody can go to university and the government pays?
Well, university can't do that currently, Evan, because they can't fill the places currently because young people won't take on that level of debt.
But it's up to them to make that decision. Sorry, it's up to them to make that decision. Will it remain their decision or will it be your decision?
I met a student who graduated 2 years ago today with £47,000 worth of debt. She does an administration job at £17,500. She won't go for a promotion because she will cross the threshold of £21,000. These people will never pay that debt back. We've got students now living with their parents into their 30s and 40s because of the housing crisis.
Mr. Kane,
we can't allow our young people, we can't draw the bridge up on them while we are pulling the drawbridge out. They can't even rely on the bank of mum and dad after the dementia tax announcement.
I'm so sorry, but how can you say the policy is costed if you've said there will be no rationing of places and you've not allowed for any growth in the numbers of students? Because one of the things one would assume is there will be more students if it's free to go to university. Somewhere the policy isn't adding up, is it?
the policy is fully costed, Evan, as all our policies are, and have been tested from outside the political realm as well. This is a commitment of £9.5 billion to 400,000 students per annum to get free tuition fees at university. And there's a clear choice in this election. Students at A-level tonight can register to vote by midnight, and they have a real choice coming forward as what they want society to look like, what they can achieve at university going forward.
Mr. Kane, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you very much indeed. Now, is Facebook a publisher of content like the BBC, or is it a platform on which content from other people appears, like a manufacturer of A4 paper? The organisation seems to think of itself as something in between. We know this thanks to The Guardian, which has published Facebook guidelines on what content is acceptable and what has to be eradicated. The moderators themselves seem to find it all rather confusing. Clearly, not everything is acceptable to Facebook. Someone shoot Trump is not, but let's beat up fat kids is. Well, Spencer Kelly, the presenter of the BBC technology magazine programme, Click, has been trying to make sense of it all.
Somewhere in the mid-90s, the World Wide Web became the Wild Wild West, seemingly full of filth, crime and crazy fonts. Many mainstream users welcomed Facebook with open arms, a nice, clean, tidy, safe walled garden where everything looked nice, everyone was your friend, and cats could be grumpy in safety. So why then does Facebook allow this? Or this? Shocking though they may seem, they don't break the rules here. Facebook's terms and conditions outline what it expects from its users. The text is longer than the US Constitution, but then why not? Its population is 6 times as large after all. And on the inside, Facebook moderators use very specific rules and flowcharts to determine what violates those T's and C's. And it's these leaked guidelines that show how the social network is trying to tread the line between being accused of over-censorship and being a platform for extremists, pornographers and racists. So why is that so hard?
If you want to create the world's most popular social networking site, you're going to face a few problems. First, size. Now, as your popularity explodes until you're receiving 1 million updates every single minute, how do you check them all? Well, you can't. You can use algorithms to block the more obviously unacceptable content, but after that you've got to rely on your users to report things that they find offensive. Then your team of moderators can take a look, but even now they're reportedly struggling to spend more than a few seconds on each case of sextortion, child abuse, violence or hate speech to determine whether it's inappropriate. And second, inappropriate to who anyway? You want to be truly global. You want to be a platform for free speech and free expression. Whose laws and values should you uphold?
British tastes are too liberal for some countries, whilst we find some of their laws unacceptable.
It is a standard social network argument these days that the responsibility for all this shouldn't lie with the website itself. Facebook wants to be seen as a platform, not a publisher.
But that chestnut might just be getting a bit old.
So it's not really about platform or publisher or pipeline. There's a much bigger issue. There is the issue of cyberspace as an environment. So in the environmental movement, there's a principle called the precautionary principle, which puts the onus on companies not to pollute the environment. So when it comes to social media, who's responsible for the cleanup?
And if its reputation as a polluter causes users to go elsewhere, so will the advertisers, who I think may just have the biggest say in what is and isn't appropriate here.
Spencer Kelly from Click there. Well, Dr. Jennifer Pybus is Senior Lecturer at the London College of Communication, University of the Arts in London. Her main research area is the political economy of big data. Jim Killock is the Executive Director of Open Rights Group. It's a digital civil liberties organisation. Very good evening to you both. Just a quickie. Is it good that we know what the guidelines are? Is it good that it's in the public domain?
Absolutely. I think maybe the bigger question right now is why is this, after Facebook has been in operation since 2005, is this the first glance that we're actually seeing at the ways in which they're regulating their content?
And are you glad we can see it, Jim, or do you think it's their own business and we shouldn't see it?
No, I'm glad that we're getting some insight into this. I think you have to recognise that if those people who are gaming the rules know exactly what the rules are, that's going to be a problem. But I do think that it's, all that said, this does not surprise me in the least. Anyone can go and watch, for instance, The Moderators, which is on Vimeo. It's been there for a month or two. It will show you exactly what happens really with the actual moderators. It takes you through the training they go through.
Well, this is a fictional thing, though, is it?
No.
Oh, it's a real...
No, it's a real documentary going to the outsourced providers. But we've seen the mistakes they've made down the years. This is not a surprise. They have very rigid rules and they're badly applied a lot of the time.
Look, let's just take this question about platform versus publisher. And where are you on that one, Jenny?
I think that if we think about what Facebook is, they want to present themselves as both. On the one hand, if they're a platform, then we understand Facebook for what it really is, which is an entity that is trying to make as much money as possible, money off of all of the data that its 1.9 billion users are uploading every single moment of the day. As a publisher, we have to be really careful, because what does publishing actually mean? If it wants to present itself as a publisher, it's not a normal publisher because it's not actually producing its own content.
It doesn't take responsibility for its content, does it? I mean, they don't produce the content, they just put it out there.
They curate the content, which I think is interesting. So they would say, we're just managing the content, we're just curating it, we're just putting it up there. They're not taking responsibility for what's actually inside the content, but they're taking responsibility for it going out into the world.
Clear that you're thinking they're more like a publisher than a platform and that they can't walk away from taking some responsibility, correct?
They have to take responsibility.
And what about you, Jim?
Well, I think what they rely on is their ability to take enough responsibility for their users to want to continue to use them. I mean, we say that this, your package said this was about the advertisers, but the advertisers are only interested if they got users, and the users are only going to stay there if they have a nice time and they like the product, and they don't find things more offensive than they can cope with, that generally the experience they have is positive. So, of course, Facebook wants to moderate. It wants to moderate because it wants its users to be happy.
Right, so what is the right... what is the right standard for them to moderate to? Should they be moderate? You know, the BBC moderates everything to quite a high standard. Would you like Facebook to moderate away everything that's kind of offensive, or only everything that's so offensive it really is illegal or almost illegal?
I think we have to kind of stand back, because if Facebook's mandate is to make as much money as possible, what is its goal in terms of the content that it's curating for its users? What it wants is its users to spend as much time as possible on that platform, and if that's its goal, then it wants to give users content that they find interesting, that they're going to want to share, that they're going to want to pass on. So in that sense, their responsibility for themselves is, we want to make sure that our users are happy, and therefore they're going to absolve themselves.
But as a society, we're allowed to say to Facebook, we're interested in what you're doing because you're a big player. What would you like the standard to be?
I think that there needs to be another third party that sits in there that helps them decide how they're going to moderate
Somebody else helps moderate
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not keen on that, I have to say. I mean, as soon as we say third party, that says to me government, and it says to me something that's even easier to regulate than Facebook, and that says even more censorious practices than Facebook has now. So I worry deeply about that as an idea. I think I think they are quite censorious, actually. These rules, they're often fairly arbitrary. They don't always make sense. But the end goal that Facebook has got is actually to censor a lot more content than we would ever dare censor in a legal sense.
I mean, Jenny, how far would you go? So the one that the papers have made a lot of today is this one. I'll read it. To snap a bitch's neck, make sure to apply all the pressure to the middle of her throat. Deeply offensive. So offensive it should be removed or not?
I would say that we need to understand the context in which this is put out there. But it's problematic and it's worrying, and this is why everybody is paying attention to this right now. What all of this unveils is that the way in which this is managed, we can call it a black box, that the algorithm that decides what content is going to be seen and what content is going to be erased for the first time is open for us to take a look at. So as soon as that's happened, people are now intervening into this debate and saying, now we have to have these kinds of bigger conversations. If we're precluding those conversations and just allowing Facebook to do this by themselves, then I think that's a problem, because there's 1.9 billion people on there all producing content.
We need to leave it there. Jim, Jenny, thanks both very much indeed. Right, the deadline for registering for the vote on June the 8th passes in less than an hour. You have until the clock strikes midnight. But some of us are far more likely to turn out than others. Turnout has historically always been lower among young voters, and those from black and ethnic minority backgrounds in particular. We asked the writer, Afua Hirsch, to explore this for us, and here's her take on the problem as she sees it, and an idea about a possible solution. Thanks for that.
Conversations at this gym in Tottenham can get very political. But the sentiments expressed here are not necessarily landing any blows in Westminster.
Yeah, I feel people feel incredibly disenfranchised and disconnected. They feel like political parties don't represent them enough.
It really does feel like a men's private club, you know what I mean, where they kind of influence everything and we're just left out in the dark.
Derek, the gym's owner and a mentor to many of its young people, fears they're being left behind by government and having to fend for themselves.
It's everywhere, so Scotland feels alienated from Westminster, but people who are like, 5-10 miles down the road are still equally alienated. And what can change that? I think, again, young people can change it, but at the moment, the politics that a lot of young men and women have got to deal with is getting from home to school, and from school to home.
This disillusionment goes some way towards explaining why black and minority ethnic voters, as well as those aged 18 to 25, are less likely to vote than all other groups. And the figures are stark. According to recent research, 57% of 18 to 24-year-olds did not vote in the last general election. That's more than double the number of over 65-year-olds. Registered black and minority voters had a turnout of only 51%, and 24% of eligible black voters are not on the voter register, compared to just 14% of eligible white voters. Black people are simply not voting. According to the campaign group Operation Black Vote, getting out to vote is more than just a matter of principle. It has very real consequences.
When you look at 50 of the most marginal seats in the country, 30 of them could easily be influenced by the black and minority ethnic vote.
Could that vote actually sway the outcome? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's even bigger than that. That vote could decide who wins and who loses in this forthcoming election. You know, when you consider that Theresa May has a working majority of 12, and we could significantly influence 30, maybe even 70, then we are big players in this dynamic.
Many young people are politicised, but I think there's something about the often arcane language of politics and the way it's conducted that they find alienating. This debating event, or Democracy Cafe in South London, is run by young people for young people in an attempt to counter voter apathy.
One of the barriers for young people not voting is just because they didn't get to learn about it enough. If we were taught about it in schools from early primary school, secondary school, I think more young people would be involved in voting.
There are a lot of adults who immediately think, oh, young people never vote, so they shouldn't even be told certain things, or they shouldn't even be, I guess, sort of let into certain things or know certain things.
But how would more voting among these groups affect the outcome? Traditionally, both young and minority voters have been associated with the Labour Party. Recent polling has found that's changing. In 1997, Labour received 80% of the black and ethnic minority vote. Data from YouGov suggests 1 in 4 now support the Tories.
A lot of my friends that I went uni with are actually voting Conservative, and some of them actively support the Conservative Party outside of even just voting. And part of that is because actually they've gone on to start up businesses, or they've gone on to work for businesses, and they've seen the business benefits of voting for that party.
It's a serious problem for democracy when elections are essentially hijacked by specific demographic groups, In this case, over 65s, white voters, as well as other categories like those who own their own homes. It undermines the entire credibility of the parliamentary process. And it seems that the changes required to remedy that simply aren't happening. It may require something more radical, and I think it's compulsory voting to set real change in motion.
I absolutely think people ought to be compelled to not only vote, but to register to vote. So if you have a national insurance number, you should be registered to vote automatically. You know, there are millions of people not even registered, some 7 million people, not even on the electoral register, and 7 million people without a voice. How can that be a dynamic democracy? So yes, no, like
there are 25 countries with compulsory voting laws, including Australia, whose turnout in the last federal election was 95%, as well as Brazil, Peru and Belgium.
It matters. It matters. It matters. It matters.
It's an idea I discussed with Director of Research with the young activist group Bite the Ballot, Kenny Imafidon.
It matters.
I have come around lately to quite a radical idea which I think might solve all the problems you're talking about. I think compulsory voting could actually be the answer.
Terrible idea.
Why?
I don't feel like we're in that sort of state of emergency where we need to consider compulsory voting. I feel like maybe once after we get people the education they need in school, and then we have a generation of people being taught that in school.
So you don't think it's that big a problem, the fact that the young people and people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds are so underrepresented in voting? You don't think that we've reached crisis point yet?
I feel like we could do that whole process without making it compulsory. Because at the end of the day, people have a right to vote and a right not to. And I feel like sometimes we have to allow people to have their right if they choose not to vote as well.
It was once said that in a democracy, it's not an election itself, but the act of voting that is democracy's defining moment. And this democracy is leaving far too many behind.
Afia Hirsch there. Now, look, before we go, there's breaking news of some kind of incident at the Manchester Arena. Details sketchy, but Greater Manchester Police have confirmed they are at the scene. They have urged people to avoid the area. I think you can see some pictures from social media. There are unverified reports on social media that there may have been explosions. Pop star Ariana Grande was performing at the arena earlier. There'll be more details on the BBC website, and you can turn over to the news channel to find out more. But from us, good night.
Hello there. Looks like being a nice day for most of us.